We're going to call the August 7th meeting of the West Sacramento City Council, Redevelopment, Successor Agency, and Financing Authority to order. We're going to begin tonight as we do each week with the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'd like to invite our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight is going to be led by Mr. Ryan Mosley. All right, the council did meet in closed session this evening to confer with our legal counsel regarding two matters of substantial exposure to litigation. No action was taken, no additional information required, and we'll be reconvening the closed session after the open session for the purpose of continuing our evaluation of the city manager. All right, with that, we're going to proceed to item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the City Council. This, as noted on our agenda, the council can't take action or have a discussion about items that are brought up under item 1A, but it is an important opportunity for a public forum. We do ask that anyone wishing to address the council on this or any other item this evening to please fill out one of the yellow cards. It's available next to Supervisor Saylor. Thank you. And turn them into the city clerk. In front of the clerk is a timer that we use to make sure that everyone gets the chance to be heard. And to that end, we ask that all testimony and comments be limited to no more than 3 minutes. Also in front of the clerk is a flip chart, and the flip chart simply indicates which agenda item the council is currently considering. We recognize that for some folks, speaking in public and before thousands of viewers at home on TV can induce some anxiety. So we do ask that there not be any boos or even applause or other demonstrations, and that we maintain a civil discourse here in the chambers. On all of the agenda items, we take the yellow cards all the way up to the conclusion of the staff report. Once the council's questions or the public comment have begun, we don't take any additional speaking requests. So if you intend to speak on any of the items that are on the agenda tonight, please be sure to fill out and return in one of the yellow cards prior to the conclusion of the staff report on that item. I would also note that item 10, which is consideration of a mitigated negative declaration and proposed lease and purchase option agreement with Clark Pacific for the city-owned properties located at 1781 and 1871 South River Road, is being continued to a future date at the request of the city manager. All right, that brings us into item 1A. So we have one request to speak on that item, which is by Mr. Bill Lowell. I'm sorry, this is 16, correct? So we have no requests under item 1A. We're going to proceed to item 1B, which is council communications. Are there any reports or other communications this evening? Mr. Johannesson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I passed out to each of you the Yolo County housing. Basically, last meeting I reported the effect of the sequestration on Yolo County housing, and this just provides more detail of the actual impact that this is having and the reductions of staff and the less people are going to be served with housing in Yolo County because of that. And the bottom line is to contact your congressperson to see what they can do about sequestration. But it's having a real impact here.
Any other reports? Mr. Kristoff.
Oh, okay. Yes, the West Sacramento JPA flood control met last month, and really the only thing of any consequence was the annual assessment. Each year we get on our property tax bill, a part of it says flood protection JPA and RD 900, RD 537 in the city of West Sacramento, and the board did pass the 2% that is allowed by state law. So we did move that forward, and so everybody gets to look forward to a few more pennies added to their tax rolls.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kristoff. Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma.
Thank you. On August 1st, last week, I did attend the SACOG Transportation Committee meeting as the alternate on behalf of Mr. Cabaldon. A few things were discussed in that meeting. Most notably, we were recognized, Mr. Cabaldon was recognized for his, we got an update on the May is Bike Month, and Mr. Cabaldon was recognized for his efforts, as was West Sac. As well as we talked about a few other items. mainly about a work plan for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Communities Strategy. That will probably come back. I think the chair is here, so I think it's coming back in October to that committee where some future work is being done on that. So there was a good discussion around that. So that was it.
All right, thank you, Member Pro Tem Ledesma. I attended last week in Park City the fall leadership meeting for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Council knows I'm the vice chair of the Jobs, Education, and the Workforce Committee for the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and so my focus is principally on workforce development and K-12 and higher education policy work that we're doing there. But in addition to that, we had an extensive briefing on the Detroit bankruptcy and the implications for municipal bonds. And the Detroit, the state government from Michigan is, which is intervening as essentially the trustee for the city, is pushing the position that those municipal bonds are essentially treated just the same as almost any other debt obligations of the city, that they don't have any special standings, or they're the same as retiree health benefits and a variety of other things. That's caused a significant amount of concern in the municipal bond markets because the full faith and credit of the city of Detroit and the people of the city of Detroit that are supposed to be standing behind those bonds, essentially the state government's position is that the investors should know that the full faith and credit of the government agency doesn't mean anything. Well, that's very problematic for municipal bonds generally. It will become much more difficult to sell bonds to support municipal projects, and more importantly, the cost of those to cities like ours will be significant. And so we'll be intervening nationally on that issue to try to counter what the state of Michigan is doing in that case. The other major issue on municipal bonds is the tax deductibility of interest on those bonds when they are tax exempt, and I think we now believe that we've turned the corner on that. It's not completely over, but it does appear that we'll have the support in the Congress to maintain that provision, which is obviously really critical for future infrastructure financing for cities like ours all across the country. We're also developing a more comprehensive water quality policy to try to get at some of the issues that I know Mr. Villegas has been dealing with as a member of the board for the Regional Sanitation District. The new administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency was confirmed by the Senate, I think, a week and a half ago, and an hour later she called the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, who's the president of the Conference of Mayors, to commit that she intends to take up the whole question of how the water quality regulations from the Clean Water Act and how they're implemented are affecting cities in terms of the cost. There are cities essentially the same size as us that are dealing with water quality costs from EPA or from the Regional Water Board equivalent in other states of $500 million, and that's obviously very problematic for cities of that size to deal with that. Others that are dealing, the city of Akron, Ohio, has got a $2.5 billion wastewater treatment upgrade bill to deal with. It's a major problem in the country, and our approach so far has been to deal with it, the symptoms of it, which is to say, how do we get the EPA to agree to longer time frames, or to, one more review, or for changing, one of the standards from 0.000008 to 0.00000075 or whatever. And I've been pushing at the conference, and I think we now have a concurrence that we need to be dealing with the TMDL issue, the total maximum daily load. So a few years back, the EPA, under congressional action, determined that essentially there's a fixed amount of pollution that's occurring in any waterway, and then a target has to be set for eliminating that pollution down to some acceptable level. But that target, the budget of pollution essentially has a couple of problems in it. One is that it includes, in some cases, naturally occurring sources. So whereas the sanitation district's dealing with the mercury issue, it's not really fair to, it's not exactly accurate to call them naturally occurring because they're largely coming from mines, which are not naturally occurring, but there's no one to clean them up. And then similarly, the federal government has exempted most of agriculture from all of the water quality regime. And so for a lot of the pollutants, cities might be responsible for 6 or 7% of the actual pollution, but are being held accountable to clean up 100% of the problem. And that's obviously not fiscally sustainable for cities. It's just that we're the only ones that exist as an organized entity. But the issue that I've been raising at the conference is that ought to be a nexus problem for the federal government in the same way that we can't do that to private parties or to property owners. And so we're going to take that up. We're going to be contracting with a nationally known attorney on the nexus issue around how to deal with that. Because we're all committed to achieving the improvements in clean water, but it's not accomplished by putting the bill only and exclusively onto the taxpayers of individual cities, or in our case, the sanitation district. So, well, we're having a meeting with the EPA next month, so I should have more on our progress there. All right, any other reports? Okay, item 1C is appointments to boards and commissions. We have none. So that brings us to item 2, which is a proclamation recognizing the West Sacramento Water Polo Club for qualifying and competing in the 2013 Water Polo Junior Olympics.
Move the item.
It's been moved by Mr. Christoph and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries and the proclamation is adopted. So I'm going to invite the whole team to come up to the podium. I'm going to present the proclamation.
You'll get lost.
No, I'm a little taller.
Okay.
Well, maybe not, actually.
Maybe not, yeah.
Come around this side. You had the right idea, but before there were cameras, before we could afford more than one camera, we only had one in the chambers. And so we created this tradition of facing outward so that the one camera that we had that was focused on the council could see who are we doing the presentation to. And it's just one of the traditions that we've kept. So this is a proclamation of the West Sacramento City Council recognizing the West Sacramento Water Polo Club for qualifying and competing in the 2013 Junior Olympics. Whereas the West Sacramento Water Polo Club is a not-for-profit USA Water Polo Association sanctioned club founded in 2009 by Ryan, Coach Mo Mosley, to introduce the sport of water polo to local West Sacramento residents and to support the River City High School water polo program. And whereas West Sacramento Water Polo's mission is to support the River City High School student athletes by cultivating a safe environment for student athletes to experience different levels of water polo competition, being inclusive for players of all abilities while providing competitive options for more experienced athletes. And whereas West Sacramento Water Polo has grown from a small local high school team to a club large enough to support young men and women across multiple age ranges, including participants across the greater Sacramento area and as far west as Dixon. That's so far. And whereas, through hard work and dedication, a roster of 15, including Stetson Tate, Austin Stewart, Christopher Irish, Julian Wright, Jonathan Kallman, Lucas Talbot, Austin Dyer, Ryan De La Rosa, Adam Rogers, Jared Tiller, Hunter Hartman, Austin Anderson, Evan Wiley, Alejandro Gonzalez Chavez, and Nathan Anderson all represented West Sacramento in the age group of 18 and under. And whereas the 2013 Water Polo Junior Olympics is the largest water polo tournament in the world, with entry earned on results of regional qualifying tournaments. And whereas, in partnership with River City High School, West Sacramento Water Polo has trained players that have been accepted at local community colleges as well as four-year universities. And whereas fundraising efforts by the West Sacramento Water Polo Club provide accessibility to water polo for athletes across all socioeconomic levels. And whereas West Sacramento Water Polo promotes hard work, determination, and pride through physical health and teamwork at regular workouts, practices, and competitions. And whereas commendation is due to the West Sacramento Water Polo Club following a successful competitive season that led to the club's first attendance at the USA Water Polo Junior Olympics in July of 2013. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the City Council of the City of West Sacramento that we do hereby recognize and offer congratulations to the West Sacramento Water Polo Club for qualifying and competing in the 2013 USA Water Polo Junior Olympics. Congratulations.
I'd like to quickly thank a couple people, if I may. The council, very appreciative of this honor to bring the boys out. The support we've received from River City High School, the City of West Sacramento, across multiple departments. Working with the aquatics facility, the West Sacramento Dolphins have all supported a new sport in this town that did not exist 5 years ago. So we'd like to present this to the mayor. And because of his unwavering support throughout the throughout Junior Olympics and keeping the town up to date, we have created, this is a honorary team member of West Sac Water Polo with his name on the back of it. Hopefully it fits. Yep, that goes in the back. Okay. All right. Thank you.
This must look ridiculous.
It looks phenomenal.
All right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Christopher know how to swim?
I said, I'll give him $100 who wears it the rest of the
Yeah, right, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, you've been challenged by Chris Ledesma that if you wear that for the rest of the meeting, he'll give you $100. Well, I wanted to just take this moment to congratulate the young man. I mean, that's a tough sport. I've been out, I've watched you guys practice, and that is a lot of work that you guys have to do. And to qualify for the Junior Olympics, that's pretty awesome. So you should be real proud of yourselves as student athletes. Congratulations. Good stuff.
Yeah, so the ESPN coverage of the Junior Olympics was preempted, and so I tried to provide some information along with the West Sacramento Water Polo Twitter folks and several of the team members and alumni about what was going on. But it was in addition to going to the Junior Olympics, it was quite a journey. It's not like you go and play one game and put it all on the line. You go and play over and over and over again, and it was a typical West Sacramento experience. The first day was tough. They lost all their games on the first day. It felt like early West Sacramento. Like you cannot get a break. And then they didn't give up. You know, they didn't say that's it. We're not good enough for the Junior Olympics. No, we are good enough for this, and we got a community and a city to represent. And they went back the next day and won every game. And it was just for me personally, it was a great sign of the values that their parents and the school and the community tries to instill. And they were such terrific ambassadors for the community, both in the pool, but the spirit and the commitment and the dedication and the unwillingness to let anything defeat them while still having a good time was quintessential West Sacramento. So thanks for everything that you did for our community. You were great ambassadors for us. And now the community is going to get really boring. So it is not considered rude if you want. You're welcome to stay, but it's also not considered rude if you choose at this point to step out of the rest of the council meeting. All right, so that brings us to the consent agenda, which is items 3 through 12 minus item 10. Are there any items on consent that any member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for separate question or comment?
You gotta read something for 5.
Yes. Anything else? 7.
I had, somebody already call out 5?
5, yes.
Yes, and item 3, please.
All right, so item 3 is consideration of amendment to the authorized position list for 2013-14.
It's just a simple question for, we're not necessarily amending a budget number or any sort of increase in what's allowed. It's just a position change, correct? We're eliminating one position.
Excuse me. No, there's no increase in the budget or the for this action.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. I think the city manager I know is aware. The new chief I'm sure is as well that this was it's been a longstanding issue for the council, but so that tonight's action should be seen as a strong vote of confidence in the chief and the department. So in addition to being a simple, no-cost administrative matter, it is also, I mean, I think the council is doing this in an affirmative way to.
Yes, absolutely.
make clear, so. Okay, item 5 is consideration of a proposed purchase, sale, and use agreement with Landmark Lofts for the sale of the city-owned properties located at the West Capitol Avenue properties noted in our agenda. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma?
I guess I just need this on item 5, and this clarification on the action we're taking, because it sounds like the project changed since we originally, we did a PSUA on this, correct? And this is, John, I'm sorry. We already did it, so the project has changed.
Yes, the project.
And so this is just coming back to us as, to include those changes, correct?
That's correct.
So is part of what I wanted to address is something we brought up before to staff, which is around the type of project this is. We want to make sure that the best management of this type of project. It's a good project. I like the way it lays out. It's incorporating the commercial side, which we on the bottom floor, which we talked about, the mixed use. I'm supportive of it, but we had talked about at some point kind of how we manage these things, or what we ask of the folks that manage these types of projects, and to make sure we're getting the good project at the end with tenants and folks that live there that are in a safe environment. So have we done any work on that, or any background on that?
Yeah, the documents contained within them in the regulatory agreement and the agreement containing covenants, which would be recorded against the land, there are management requirements in there. And one of the requirements, one of the conditions precedent to a certificate of occupancy is that they submit a management plan that's reviewed and approved by the city, and there's requirements for that are enumerated in the documents to cover maintenance standards and tenant screening and all the things you'd normally expect to see in a good management plan.
And I think at one time that we talked about I know we included that, but whether or not an evaluation of this, those are the best practices that make these types of things work. I think we had talked about, and I'm not opposed to the project. I'm just, at some point, we want to know, is that the best way to get the end of the project? I forgot when we had that discussion, but we had wanted to know that as we move forward on these types of projects, to make housing projects, these types of methods and management practices that are in place, are they the best way to kind of get the outcome we're looking for?
Right. Well, the criteria that we use to develop the expectations that are in the document are based on work that staff has done over the years, looking at different documents from different cities. And I can't say, the last time we did that, but it is kind of an ongoing, evolving process. When we see a management plan that has a provision in it that we haven't seen before that appears to be working in another jurisdiction, we put that into kind of the standard specification list that we use to develop these. So we're making an effort to do that, to have it be the best practices that are out there.
All right, and when we take this item on the consent agenda, we'll be adding, we'll simply note that this agenda item 5 is exempt from CEQA pursuant to CEQA guideline section 15332, which is as a class 32 infill development project, and we'll repeat that again when we get to the motion. All right, item 7 is consideration of award of construction contract for the Pioneer Bluffs Bridge project. Mr. Villegas?
As I went back through the staff report, I think I've actually answered my questions, and it was regarding the Doken contract, so I think I'm good.
Okay. All right. And he doesn't get any credit, but I do want to just acknowledge the application on the Village Parkway extension is in, or almost in, for SACOG. So to deliver on our intention to make sure that the bridge, we have a next phase plan for dealing with the opportunity that the bridge presents.
I did have one question on this, and that was, we had a $10 million grant that was, in essence, going to go to the port, and then we transferred it over so that this bridge could get done, because it wasn't enough money from a port perspective to really get a lot done, and we continue to work with Congress to try to get some deepening monies additional deepening monies for the port. But on this one, that $10 million, it looks like we are a little over budget on that. Because it looks like it came in at 10.6.
Yes, that's correct.
So where do we get the $670,000?
Well, I got it from Natish.
Good answer.
And I'd like to invite Natish up here to answer that question.
I think he's got my answer,
He wasn't supposed
but
to
he's
say
not
that.
quite all of it. I think he got $500,000 of it, but not quite all of it.
So our grant was 9.6 million, and the project came in at 10.6. The $1 million, actually 950, is part of the 450-some thousand is coming from traffic improvement fund, and the other 450 we are actually borrowing from the community investment fund, Fund 106.
106?
Yes, and we'll pay back from future Southport traffic fees that loan.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So the two alternatives that are described in the agenda, they're both about the bridge itself, right? Or is there?
Oh, what? I'm sorry.
They both deal with the bridge itself. Is
They
there-
do.
The additional traffic signals that were part of the project, are they in the base under this?
They're under the base part of the bid, yes.
Both of them.
Correct.
All right. So we added elements to the project because of your estimate that we could incorporate them within the budget that we had, and which I'm fully supportive of. It has put us in the position then, however, of then having to deal with those as almost givens and allocating traffic impact fees, which we have hardly any of, to those enhancements, both on the bridge itself and the additional traffic signals. And those might not have been the highest priorities for the limited traffic impact fee funds we had if what was put before us was, here are your top 10 council priorities on transportation that are eligible to be funded out of the traffic impact fee fund. Which ones do you want to fund? I don't know that both signals and the railings and all that would have made it to the top. So we do need a system that puts that choice in front of us. I don't mean necessarily at the front end, but in a meeting like tonight that extracts those so that we have the ability to remove the additions that were put in because we thought we had more money that we had, rather than commit, because essentially what we've done is commit not fully commit, but we've signed on to $600,000 or $900,000 worth of traffic impact fee funding ultimately, or $900,000 out of traffic impact fees, without ever having made that decision. And that's, from just a governance perspective, that's problematic for me. So I'm fine with the item, and I'm fine with with this amount happening, but we should have some procedure in place that makes sure that we don't end up getting backed into a policy choice around the priorities, especially on that fund, because it's one of our most heavily impacted funds for some really critical projects in the city. So, and I support the traffic light at 15th and all of that. I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but it needed to be stacked up against other priorities as well. So, into the future.
Just one more thing, and that is, none of that includes Village Parkway connection, does it?
That's correct.
Okay, so, I mean, it's gonna be, it's gonna behoove staff to really start to think about Village Parkway, because we really don't want to have a bridge to nowhere, and I know staff has heard this before. But at the same time, we need to start to think how this is going to start to evolve.
So we're just this week submitting the application for the SACOG
right.
funds for Village Parkway as at least one potential source that would allow us to be not construction being done at the same time as the bridge, but at least at the point that the bridge is open, that we'll be able to it'll be clear to the community what's happened, that the next step is happening.
That's what I think is critical. It is critical that the people understand that, hey, we're working like heck to get Village Parkway to connect so that there are other ingresses and egresses other than Jefferson Boulevard or South River Road. So, I mean, that's what I want to continue to stress, so that the folks know that, hey, we're not just building a bridge and you won't have any connection, but that we are doing that.
And we currently are. We
Yeah.
did budget some money in the CIP to start design on that. So we'll be coming shortly here with a contract to do that. And then, as they've mentioned, we are pursuing that grant, that community design grant for
Okay,
SACOG.
super. Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item 8 is consideration of a letter of support for the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District's funding application for the regional bike share program. I'm supportive. I pulled this one, so I'm supportive of it. The full plan's not attached to this document. All we have is which is fine, but all we have is the location map, which is of course a key. It is probably the most important key question for us in the project. And as you look at the location map, anybody that looks at it will see that there's not much on the west side of the river, and there's simply two. And so as we send our letter of commitment for support, I think we need to raise this issue. And there are two things I think, and not having seen the report, that I just want to be sure have been considered. One is the environmental justice implications of the distribution of what stations we're intending to do. And so when you generate a map based on what you forecast ridership to be, if that's heavily determined by what ridership is today, and ridership today is principally by people like you, right? I mean, what we'll be investing in is creating a service that's really for a relatively narrow segment of the community. And so, and I worry about that. I mean, just looking at the map and the heavy ESAC and land park representation, which is a reflection of that. That biking is achieved a higher level of at least officially recognized penetration among a wealthier and wider market than it has others. And so that is one of the reasons why there's many more stations on the other side and in Davis than there are here. Related to that, though, is how the bike share strategy connects to and aligns with the land use development pattern. And the commitment under the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the blueprint is, hey, all the population growth is occurring here. Pretty much all of it for Yolo County. And pretty much zero of it is occurring in Davis. But that only works if you make the transportation investments that support and align with that before the fact, or at least concurrent with the fact. If you simply generate bike share stations based on existing population centers, existing bicycle usage, you're not fulfilling that commitment. We're not fulfilling that commitment, and we're setting ourselves up for failure. So more, from that perspective, from the regional blueprint perspective and from our general plan perspective, more important than citing these bike share stations at places where everybody's already biking is citing them at places like the Capitol Yards that we're doing the groundbreaking of tomorrow, or other locations in the Bridge District as opposed to a single Bridge District location, or Washington Square. Places where we and the region together have said these are places for more denser urban style development, and where we're not. And the other element of that is where we're not doing the planning for lots and lots of parking. That commitment was done on the assumption that there would be both transit and fully adequate biking and pedestrian facilities. So to me, we need to be strongly pushing those themes and issues as we move forward with the project. I believe in the project. I've written probably 16 bike share programs across in other places. I think it's a great project, but for it to have impact and not simply be a yuppie amenity, we have to be thinking through its connections on both of those dimensions now, and advocating for them as the program is coming together. All right, thanks. Item 9 is consideration of a one-year extension for the contract for services with the West Sacramento Chamber of Commerce. And I pulled this just to say I'm very supportive of this. I do think we've made some reductions to it over the years along with the rest of our budget. Those were necessary, they're appropriate. And I'm not proposing any change at this moment, but because we're including authorization in it for a renewal, some of the other activities that we're engaged in, and since Rob's in the front row, the innovation work that we're, in terms of trying to build and incubate tech and innovation-oriented businesses in our community, as we're looking at additional roles that we ought to be looking at the resources that we're deploying there. We really could. There's no place in the region that has a chamber like ours, and if their story was told better in the region, we would have a lot of envious cities. I mean, the collaboration between this chamber and the city is, really unprecedented throughout the region. But also the chamber's role as a sort of an all-purpose community benefit nonprofit, as opposed to strictly a business advocate. It's not like every day is, will you lower my fees and ease my regulations? That's every other day, but in between those days, they're constantly on the lookout for doing things that will improve the quality of life in our community. So I'm supportive of the item as it is, but I do think we, as we're looking at both some of our immediate strategic plan goals and more broadly, that we ought to be taking a look at unwinding in the same way that we are and at the same pace that we are in the rest of the city organization, some of the reductions that we've made over the years. All right, so that's it on consent. So what we have before us is items 3 through 12 minus item 10, and again with a note on item 5 that it is exempt from CEQA pursuant to CEQA guidelines 15332 as a class 32 infill development project. Is there a motion? Mr. Johannesson?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing no, motion carries. Consent agenda is adopted. Item 13 is a Community Development Block Grant public hearing for consideration of 2012-13 grantee performance reports and closeout of grants 09 EDF 6366 and 10 STBG 6744.
Good evening. We're here this evening to ask that the council conduct a public hearing to review activities that were accomplished with community development block grant funding over the past fiscal year. The city receives this funding from the State of California Department of Housing and Community Development, but the funds originate from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, known as HUD. CDBG funds must be used primarily for benefit to low and moderate income households. And for example, that would be in West Sacramento, a 4-person household with an income of below $61,500 annually. There is a very lovely, terribly exciting report attached to your staff report. It's called the Grantee Performance Report. I'm not going to go into all the details. I'm just going to hit the highlights, and then we'll be available for questions. The city has always tried to use CDBG funds to act as a catalyst to stimulate housing activities, to stimulate economic development, and to leverage our scarce city resources. And so that's the goals that we have been working on this year. One of those activities has been to maintain our housing stock and to support home ownership in our older neighborhoods to maintain the character of those neighborhoods. We completed 2 housing rehabilitation projects for owner-occupied units and 6 for mobile homes. Most of those, I can't remember now exactly how many, I think it was either 4 or 5, were replacements of mobile homes that were they were so old they could not even be rehabilitated. And the mobile homes were primarily very low and extremely low income households, so these were households that were particularly needy. 1 first-time homebuyer loan was accomplished, and over the last couple of years we've used NSP funds, Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which is a kind of a sister of CDBG, to purchase, rehab, and resell to homebuyers 18 homes, and these have all been in the oldest neighborhoods that were most impacted several years ago by the foreclosure crisis. We're currently using a small amount of our NSP to develop some affordable rental housing, to take people who are formerly homeless with disabilities and provide them with affordable housing that comes along with supportive services so that they can maintain their housing status. CDBG funds were used last year for the Learning Ladder preschool. They recently had a little graduation ceremony for a number of students. 12 of those students were low-income students that were provided free preschool with CDBG funds. We're closing out 2 grants at this time. One is the 2009 Economic Development Grant, and the other is the 2010 General Allocation Grant. 2009 grant all went in one fell swoop to the Denny's restaurant project. That project's created 12 jobs so far, and I was over meeting with the owner the other day, and he's getting ready to hire more because he said this summer his business is just continuing to increase, so he's very pleased. And in meeting with these folks and documenting their income and documenting their circumstances as required by CDBG, it was very interesting to find out the circumstances. 4 of those people had 0 income when they got hired. I mean, they weren't even extremely low income. They were living on food stamps and the generosity of friends. So one lady had lost her children, and she was able to get her children back because she got that full-time job. So they were all very thankful to have their jobs. We have micro-enterprise classes that for 33 persons last year. These are people that are low-income business owners with 5 or fewer employees, or people that want to start, low-income persons that want to start a small business like that. So we had people, everything from a woman that wanted to sell her own handmade jewelry, to a gentleman that had an automotive repair shop, to a lady that wanted a food truck, just all sorts of ideas, and people that were really interested in stimulating our economic growth here in West Sacramento by starting their own businesses. Let's see here. I believe those are all of my comments. I'm available for any questions.
All right, are there questions for staff before we open the public hearing? All right, seeing none, then we're going to open the public hearing on item 13. I don't have any requests to speak, but because it's a legal public hearing, does anyone wish to address the council on this item? Seeing none, close the public hearing, return to the council for any additional questions, discussion, or for a motion.
I'd move the item.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Item 14 is consideration of a public hearing of ordinance 13-2, repealing and adding chapter 13.09 of the City of West Sacramento Municipal Code relating to wastewater discharge.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. The proposed changes to Municipal Code Chapter 13.09 were presented to you for discussion on July 17th of this year. There weren't any requested changes to the amendments, so they remain the same, other than, of course, the removal of the erroneous comments that were left in my attachments last time. So it's clean now. And basically, we're just requesting that the council conduct a public hearing on Ordinance 13-2 and waive the first reading, read by title and number only, the ordinance repealing and replacing Municipal Code 13.09 of the West Sacramento Municipal Code.
All right, are there any questions for staff at this time? Seeing none, we're going to open the public hearing on item 14. Again, have no request to speak, but as a public hearing, does anyone wish to address the council on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and return to the council for questions, discussion, or motion.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Johannesson and seconded by Mr. Villegas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Item is adopted. Item 15 is a public workshop on the first administrative draft of the YOLO Natural Heritage Program. Ms. Hamilton.
Good evening, council. Let me get situated here. I understand that the monitors are not working, so the PowerPoint presentation, you'll have to refer to your handouts. Madam City Clerk, is the overhead going to work? Okay, good.
And other times it does.
Probably install the same thing today for.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Okay, well, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties with the large screen as well. So we'll go ahead and start. Good evening. This item is returning to you in a workshop format. This is for the first administrative draft of the YOLO Natural Heritage Program. Although this is more of a workshop style, staff is looking for direction on the city's continued participation in the program towards completion of the second administrative draft. So I'll begin with sort of an overview of the YOLO Natural Heritage Program, the first administrative draft that was released on July 1st. The document is over 2,000 pages. Staff has been working through reviewing it, and our reviews to date is still a little bit preliminary. And so I'm going to get into some of the overview. I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail. Some of that's contained in the staff report. Ultimately, this is going to focus more on some of the considerations, especially that which the Agricultural and Natural Resources Commission discussed earlier this month. So the current draft of the YOLO Natural Heritage Program is a habitat conservation plan and a natural communities conservation plan. It's proposing to conserve 75,200 acres. Within that, there are 32 covered species. Those are species that are federally or state protected. There are 42 species of local concern that are not part of the permit plan but are being discussed. The permit for this type of plan would be a 50-year permit, and the cost, as identified in this first administrative draft, to implement the habitat conservation as well as the natural communities conservation is $504.7 million over the life of the permit. To break that down, the habitat conservation portion, the mitigation portion, is equivalent to $175.5 million. And that will primarily come from development projects that are paying fees to mitigate the disruption of the habitat. The conservation portion of the proposal is equivalent to $329.2 million currently. And conservation is typically funded through grant and local share. There's not only state and federal grants, but also private foundation grants that you typically find funding conservation. Yolo County currently, and over the history of Yolo County, has positioned itself fairly well for to take on such a plan. Even without a formal plan, Yolo County has about 60,000 acres in existing open space and agricultural that is protected, but yet not formally managed. And those are protected primarily through open space elements and agricultural conservation elements within the various general plans in the county. On the covered species, just to provide some context to West Sac, the plan covers 32. Of those 32, 15 are known to exist within the West Sacramento city limits. And those are primarily birds. And then of the species of local concern, 4 have been known to exist within the city limits of West Sacramento. We have okay. So moving on to the next slide in your handout. This slide shows the various counties, and you'll notice that this shows that the current plan would cover the entire Yolo County. It also shows the surrounding habitat and conservation plans that are already in place. So there's one for Solano and Sutter, Natomas and Sacramento. And the crosshatched area shows the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. And so there's a considerable overlap within the city takes up almost the majority of our city. So we have an overlap, and that'll be discussed a little bit later. That is one of the issues that needs to be addressed if we move forward. And then moving on to the next slide. This slide portrays pictorially the future planned development footprints that are considered within the first draft plan. So the pink highlighted areas, you'll notice that all of the city of West Sacramento is highlighted as pink. So this first draft plan is assuming that we will build out per our general plan, as well as the communities of Davis and Woodland, and Winters, and then an area up by the Dunnigan Hills, and then there's a few other scattered areas. So those are the development footprints that are currently part of the plan. On the next slide, this shows the public and easement habitat lands that are in the plan area. And so the dark green, category 1, are the areas where they're predominantly natural habitat, and it will be covered by irrevocable conservation easements, either state or federal mandates. And then the category 2, which is the lighter green, are areas of public land but do not have conservation mandates or private conservation easements over those. So there's already a considerable amount, and the plan would also be looking to add to this. The next slide is a compilation of all the various habitats that are, there we go. Is a compilation of all the various habitats in the plan, and that was part of the GIS system. And so there's overlap. What you're seeing is the overlap of habitats. Certain species share a lot of the same needs, similarities, geographies. And so the lighter the color, either the gray, there's no habitat, the kind of the yellowish, there's maybe 1 to 3 species in those areas. There are some areas that are slightly red, and those are the areas with the highest concentration. And I can't get there we go. So, yes, so let's start up at the north. There's one up in the north area. And these tend to be areas where there's either the occurrence of or the possibility of occurrence for plant species. These tend to have more of the plant species. So they might be of the alkali sinks, where the soil and the characteristics are just right to, if they don't exist already, that they could exist. So they could be potential areas where restoration could occur. So there's one in the north, there's one at the southeast of Woodland, and then there is one in the bypass down near number 16. And there's a fourth one, but we always have a hard time identifying it because it's so small, but it's near the city of Davis. And so bringing this specific to West Sacramento, you'll notice that the majority of our city is gray, no habitat, representing the fact that we're fairly urban developed, but we do have habitat in the southern part of the city. The next slide shows the corridors, and these are the ecological corridors that have been identified in the current draft, demonstrating the connectivity between the various types of habitats and how the species might move, and how we might want to preserve those types of corridors for species mobility. Okay, next slide. The covered activities that are currently in the draft plan I won't go through all of these, but the ones that are most specific to our city are urban development, build out of our general plan, coverage for specific projects such as Seaway, Stone Lock, and then also infrastructure projects, roadways, most specifically here, our flood protection program, and also port improvements that do not occur within the water. This plan does not cover activities where we would be entering into the water, such as constructing possibly a dock or doing the dredging. And so the list here is what's covered through the permit, would be covered through the permit, including the implementation of the program. Even the Habitat Conservation and Natural Communities Conservation Plan itself needs to mitigate for any of its impacts. Next slide. So the one thing that this draft plan does not cover, does not include yet, is there's four significant outstanding issues with the wildlife agencies and interest groups. And that is the Bay Delta Conservation Plan interface. There's quite an overlap into the Yolo County area. Giant garter snake conservation, Swainson's hawk, and agricultural conservation strategy. Moving on into the next draft, these four issues will be a significant discussion to try to get those resolved with the wildlife agencies and with the interest groups, such as the farmers and some of the environmental groups. Next. So the Agricultural and Natural Resources Commission held a meeting earlier in July, and unfortunately they weren't able to have a quorum, so their discussion had to remain informal, and they're not able to make a formal recommendation to you. But these are the four items that they really dove into, not so much the details of the plan, but what value it brings to the city, whether or not this plan should be a mitigation-only plan or whether it should be mitigation and conservation. Looking at the species of local concern, since they're not going to be part of the actual permit with the state and federal agencies, should that even be a part of the plan at this point, or should that be handled some other way? And how might that be funded? A little bit of discussion on that. And then as well as looking at what happens if we don't move forward. What does the landscape look like for our city without this type of plan? And on that last note, to compare, the one thing that a plan of this nature would provide for us is our developments and our flood protection program. We would know what the mitigation and conservation requirements would be, because they will have already been negotiated if we can get to a point where a permit is issued. We'll know what the fees are. We'll know the timelines that will take to get a memorandum of understanding of consistency with the plan and be able to use that permit. And then also it does provide an additional take protection as far as the take of a species or the take of a habitat, especially with regard to the white-tailed kite, which is a bird. Without the plan, the projects will have to negotiate their own individual permits, and that would even apply to the West Africa flood protection projects. And there, it's on an individual basis. The costs are unknown, the timeline can be lengthy, and the take protection can be questionable if there's a challenge on the project. So in general, the Ag and Natural Resources Commission found that there's still value to the city to keep moving forward on this plan, provided that it moves in a timely fashion, it holds to a schedule, there's accountability there, and that there's still grant funds that continue to flow to help pay for the drafting of the plan. They did see value in the combined mitigation and conservation plan due to the possibility of future grants that would flow towards conservation. They weren't able to comment as much on the species of local concern because there's still quite a bit more discussion that needs to occur on that. And they almost feel as though it should really focus more on just getting a plan done and then maybe looking at the species of local concern either in some other fashion. So they were hesitant on that one to provide any further direction on that. They were concerned about the impacts of not moving forward to the flood protection program, knowing how important that program is to the city. We also discussed with them how this plan fits into the council's strategic plan. We identified flood protection, urban development consistent with the SACOG blueprint, the food industry hub because a plan of this nature would bring about the potential for more agricultural conservation, and also local investment, whereby the mitigation and conservation dollars that are either paid by developments in our city and or grants funds that are brought in would stay here in the county as opposed to potentially creeping outside where there's might be similar habitat just outside. So it's keeping it more within the county and a commitment to that. Overall, they recommended moving forward to the next draft, given these parameters. So the next steps, the JPA board meeting is going to be discussing the future of the program on Monday, August 12th. And if the council directs city staff, we've already been in the process of compiling comments on the first administrative draft. And if you direct us to do so, we would be submitting those to the advisory committee by August 16th so that they can be compiled and then given to the JPA board by August 30th. And that concludes my comments. I will note that County Supervisor Don Saylor, also chair of the JPA board, is in the audience and available for questions, as well as Ms. Petrea Marchand, who is the executive director to the Yellow Habitat Natural Heritage Program.
All right, thank you. So my intention is that we would first take council questions if there are any, then invite Supervisor Saylor as the chair of the chair of the JPA board to make some comments, and then we would go directly to Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma on the same subject, and then the council discussion. So, but are there questions for staff at this point? All right, Supervisor Saylor, would you do us the honor of a few overview remarks? And I want to acknowledge as we're focused on the plan this evening, but a great deal of work and blood, sweat, and tears, and more blood, and not a inconsequential amount of money has been spilled by a lot of parties to get us to a point where we could even be having this discussion. And certainly to acknowledge our colleague, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma, who's worked really hard to put the finances in order of the JPA in order for this to happen. But I know that that's been a close partnership between Mr. Ledesma, Supervisor Saylor is the chair of the board, and Petrea Marchand is the executive director, that all three of them have worked very hard along with our staff and many others, but the three of them really are on point to salvage this whole process and all of the work and investment that has occurred up to this point, and making it this a viable enterprise, at least at this point, and working so hard also with our partners in the state and federal government to make sure that we stay on track and that we take advantage of whatever grant opportunities become available, including the significant grant that has recently been received. So with that introduction, Supervisor Saylor.
Thank you very much, Mayor Cabaldon. I echo everything that you just said. I think this city has participated actively and been very strong contributors over the past year that Chris and I have been in the leadership roles with this JPA board. Your city manager has also participated very productively with the other city managers and the county administrative officer in their monthly meetings that they've been holding. And Ms. Hamilton, her presentation tonight was was really wonderful, very clear, very, very cogent. But she's also been participating as a member of the advisory committee, and there's an advisory committee of about 30 people from all over the county, from agricultural interests and academics and environmentalists, across the board community members, and they've been, and the staff of all the jurisdictions, and they've been kind of putting input into this process. This plan document that you have that we've released a few weeks back is nobody's choice of the bottom line. This is not the final answer. It begins the conversation. This thing has been underway since about 2002 in this current iteration. This is the first time that there's been one complete package that we can all look at and see, well, what are the pieces? How do they all fit together? Where do we go from here? I think you all know the challenges that I know you're aware of the challenges that we faced over the past year, and the work that it's taken to put the ship aright. And it's been a substantial amount of administrative work to get the thing to where it is today, that we can all look each other in the eye and say, here's where we are, where do we want to go with it? There are a number of moving pieces, as there always are in these complex patterns of these complex plans. Some of the moving pieces include that slide where you saw the riparian corridors, or excuse me, the habitat corridors along Cache Creek and the Berryessa Hills and Puda Creek and the Dunnigan corridor. A good share of the acreage that's under discussion is in those areas, and we need to really dig into whether that's significant or not, whether that's something we want to continue with. The issues of the species of local concern that Charlene mentioned, that's an issue that we agree. I think we all will agree at the JPA board is an area that we should be paring back. There are a lot of these issues when you look at this thing and you take it the magnitude of $500 million plus, 75,000 acres plus, 32 species that are in one group, 42 species in another group. Is that all where we want to go? Are all of the covered activities that are listed activities that we want to include in the plan? Are there ways of funding portions of this that are not yet identified in the plan? These are issues that we need to continue to grapple with. The federal partner has recently provided a $999,000 grant for the phase 3 of this planning process, but we don't get to phase 3 until we've completed phase 2. We're just ending up, this is phase 1. Phase 2, we have a strong possibility of working to have a wildlife conservation board grant that we're expecting that's going to come before that board in November, where nobody is asking any of the member jurisdictions at this point, and I don't believe we intend to. Our entire commitment is not to ask for additional contributions over what you already budgeted for this year. All the member agencies have participated for the first time ever, small financial contributions relatively last year and this year again. The other governing bodies have done the same thing you're doing tonight. Last night, the Winter City Council voted 5-0 with expressions of concern and questions and direction to their representatives to continue in the process. The Woodland City Council did the same thing on Monday night, and the Board of Supervisors did the same thing yesterday morning. The Davis Council advises that they have already budgeted the funds and they're good. They're in for the long haul. So we have unanimous votes from all of our colleagues coming to continue the effort, but not without serious concerns and not without articulating their significant questions about where we are at this point. And the charge, I think, that is really constructive for us is let's keep going. Have we built the credibility in the process and in the infrastructure that you're confident that we can represent the interests of your city? I will tell you, your representative has done a tremendous job of representing the interests of West Sacramento in our board. Do you have confidence that we can continue to take the ongoing planning steps and dig into the questions and negotiate in a reasonable and tough manner with our state and federal partners on the issues that are going to make or break this plan? And in the bottom line, when we get to the question of should we proceed with the plan or not, is it beneficial to our jurisdictions? Is it worth the cost, or should we do something else to achieve the mitigation and the conservation that we think is necessary? So bottom line, it's going to be a cost benefit decision for us all. So that's where we are, and Petrea knows everything there is to know, and I'm learning every day how little I know. So if there's more I can, if there's any question I can help with, please let us know. Thank you very
Thanks so
much. Appreciate it.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma.
Thank you, and thanks Supervisor Saylor and Petrea for coming out. I also want to acknowledge another person that hasn't been mentioned here. It's Heidi Schuden, who's been critical in this process for the past year. Heidi has, when our board started to go through financial troubles a year ago, we were discovered, and we need to get the project back on plan to build the credibility with our state partners and our federal partners. Heidi was a consultant that was well respected. Heidi has done an enormous amount of work to oversee the project planning for this process. It's an important point because it goes to what we're investing to, and to know, having the confidence of my peers, both here at council and to the other jurisdictions that also voted on this, to know that that work has been done. Heidi's done a tremendous job of organizing this and keeping things moving. And I want to acknowledge her as well, because she's been a great partner in this. And two, thanks to Marty Tuttle and Charlene from our staff. They've done a great job. But Supervisor Saylor's right, and thank you for your kind words, Dawn, about the role we've played in the past year, and a lot of your leadership has led to kind of where we are today. And I appreciate the partnership, but you had the right part, the right jumping off point for me, which I wanted to sort of frame out for our council to deliberate this a little bit, which is around the value of the plan and moving forward. I think, first of all, just on terms of the credibility of the process, or that is the business of planning, that's the business of the JPA. I hope we've proven that. I think we have. I hope that's not much more of an issue with you, that whatever money we do invest, I think there should still be question and scrutiny on us, but as a JPA board, but I'm really confident about where we are, processes we put in place to make sure financial controls are there, and to make sure that we are looking at every opportunity to have the planning process on time, on budget, or even under budget. I think that's been a priority of ours, and it continues to be built into the culture of our little JPA. And I think that's just an important part in terms of understanding kind of the jumping off point for where we are. But ultimately, it does come down to the value of this HCP and the planet, the HCP and NCCP and the plan itself. You know, I went back and we looked back at some of the documents that came up when in 2006 in the agreement with the state in terms of how we'd utilize some of the mitigation funds, and some of you voted, I think, at that time on kind of this process, and talked about some of the benefits of this process, streamlined permitting process for development, making sure they're consistent and predictable times from the state and getting permits, and then the mitigation process, the plans, the fees involved. All that is still true today. That's the benefit of having a plan. And I want to acknowledge Chair Kennedy and our little our Ag and Natural Resources Committee. They vetted this very well. They did a tremendous job of understanding the issues, and I think that's one of the things that they identified was that those things are still important. So as long as we know that, and I know, Charlene, you had a story about a project that we had in West Sacramento recently where we had to have a mitigation, I think it was in the Bridge District, is that right?
Yes, in the Bridge District where the sewer force main and pump plant is, where the one walnut tree was as well. There was an elderberry, and still exists an elderberry bush over there. And we originally had submitted an application to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to take the bush out because there didn't appear to have evidence of the beetle. We submitted for it. We thought in plenty of time. It sat on the desk for about 6 months. We had a consultant bird dogging it for weeks. After 8 months, and when it was about to hold up the project, ultimately we had to come back to you and ask for $150,000 more to bore the sewer force main underneath the bush and allow the bush to remain. because we couldn't afford to have the project hold up.
Right.
But we never even got to the point of having them even being able to look at our permit application.
And thank you, Charlene. I think, and that was just an illustration of what is life without the plan, or what could it be. And I think of the hat I've tried to wear, or the glasses I've tried to wear through this process, is thinking of Councilmember Kristoff, thinking of our flood control projects and what kind of grief we could go through. And this still has benefit for that reason. But the plan itself, you know, the issues, the feedback that we need, that I need, and if we choose to move forward, which I hope we would, is give us the opportunity to now go talk to the state. Chair Saylor is right that this plan, as it's been presented in 2,000+ pages, is a starting point for a conversation. All indications are that all our partners in the state and federal agencies are ready to talk through that and get to a plan that is right-sized for the cost that we would all have to bear, that would be right-sized for our county and what we have available already. And we talked about 60,000 acres, 60,000+ acres of open space and conserved land that we've already have out there that could be utilized towards that goal, the targets that we have outlined. So all these things are on the table there for us to start a conversation with. And I think it's just important that we keep that in mind, that this is for us to form and to go to our state partners and talk to about what is the right plan for us, because in the end it will still make sense for West Sacramento, and from the sense that we can continue on our trajectory of growth, of economic development, knowing that there's a predictable process for permitting for the mitigation of species that are predominantly in our area, and specifically some of the birds, Swenson's hawk, and then the other birds that were outlined today. So that's my brief view on this. I think we put ourselves in a good position. I will say that we continue and plan to continue managing this JPA as though it's in the most urgent of areas, so that we know there's a definite time. We heard you loud and clear previously. We need to see something out of it, and we've come through with a draft plan. We plan to continue that way through the rest of this plan. What the timeframes are, we don't know, but we have to get to that point and start negotiating with the state about what this plan actually is. So that's the only comments I had, and really I wanted to use this opportunity to make sure you had chances to give your feedback onto what you want to see on this, what are your concerns, and whether or not this is still worth and of value for West Sacramento to move forward as part of this JPA.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma and Supervisor Saylor and Petrea Marchand, the director, as well. I just to open up the conversation about it. I mean, I do think the JPA leadership and administrative organization certainly has earned the temporary trust and confidence of our city and the other cities and partners. I mean, there's nothing else that you could have done, but you've had to correct a decade's worth of problems in a very short period of time. And so to me, the leadership at both the board and the management level is the best that we could have, and for a very complex problem that we have to solve. So for me, that question's answered, and the quick milestones that we've been setting in every time we've taken up this conversation. Well, by Tuesday, are you going to have an administrative draft? And you do. You've delivered in all those areas, and the Fish and Wildlife. $1 short of $1 million grant is a strong endorsement of the work that you've been doing, and also of the likely cooperation of the federal partners. So to me, it makes sense to continue in the frame that we have been for the benefits that you've described as well. I do think we're going to have to meet this question of the HCP versus NCCP and the choice. And I know for some it's a difficult one. For me, it's a difficult one. I prefer the NCCP approach, but I don't necessarily prefer it at 3 times the cost. And I was the council's designee as a very young man on this when we first got onto this project, and with Mayor Lois Wolk of Davis and the rest of the jurisdictions putting together this JPA, and it involved a lot of compromises, and we were a city of 29,000 people at the time with 1 supervisor, and we didn't have although we expected to have a large share of the growth, it wasn't that large, and we had to make a lot of compromises in that initial JPA, and in terms of the composition of the board, and to be blunt, the creation of what I think at the time was a steering committee of all of these groups that sort of took over the process for a good chunk of the decade, and partly weak management leadership, and partly a board that wasn't as attentive, and all of us have been on it at one point or another, I think, except for Mr. Trias, and that was allowing the quote-unquote stakeholder groups to drive the process, and that has a couple consequences that are asymmetric for us. One is that those interests largely aren't from here, right? So the established county environmental groups are pretty much all headquartered in Davis, or maybe there's some folks that live in Winters too, but when they look at the environment, the lens that they're looking at is right onto Puda Creek and right up the road to where they get coffee in Winters and go to the Palms to music. So their view of what the environment is different than if you're John Kennedy and you're living in Southport and you're a member of our Ag Commission, where you might see the Delta and the rivers as the environment. And so it's a subtle distinction, but if you take it over 10 years of recommendations and around what species you're prioritizing and under what time frame, it does affect it. And it's not I'm picking the environmental piece, but the academic one is even worse, right? Not surprisingly, most of the academics that are in this mix are in Davis, or some of them live in Winters, but there's just it's not broadly reflective of simply the view of the actual literal view of the county in the first place, and then their interests have been reflected in that. And so I think Charlene kind of highlighted the map with or Dawn did actually, with the corridors, and it's a good example of sort of why that's emerged in that way, where all of the targeted corridors are farther, if you're watching the water polo one, they're farther away from us than Dixon even. They're that far away from our community. And it's not so much that I would like, just as much as Davis and Woodland and Winters, to have more easements protecting against further sprawl and development, but just from a biological perspective, our responsibility really is to deal with the elderberry beetle and the Swainson's hawk and some other species for whom the consequences of our development are the most severe. And it simply is not biologically ethical to say, well, we've removed 5,000 acres of potential Swainson's hawk habitat, but don't worry about it because we are making investments in mitigation easements in the Blue Ridge corridor on the top of the Coast Range, right? And we're going to put up a sign that says, Mr. and Mrs. Swainson's hawk, please detour 70 miles to the west. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's as mitigation, it doesn't make any sense. And so the notion of an NCCP as being more than just mitigation, I would like to go in that direction if we can, and I know our state and federal partners would as well. But it still needs to be closer to something that's like mitigation first, right? That you actually do have to do the mitigation. That's just not some side project. We need to be able to look the Swainson's hawk in the eye and say, yeah, we're taking care of you. And so there are, as we're going to be dealing with those habitat issues. And I don't think the structure that we've had, the effect of it over time has very subtly but consistently and compounding on itself shifted a lot of the choices in ways that have moved the easements away from really mitigating for the habitat loss that has occurred as a result of development in our part of the county. And that's only going to get more exacerbated because in the intervening period since we created the JPA, the blueprint and the MTP and the SCS has come out, and as a result, the vast majority, not just a large share, but the vast majority of development that's going to be occurring in the county, with the possible exception of Dunnigan Hills, but the vast majority of everything else is going to be here. That wasn't the case when the JPA was created. We were going to be a big player, but it wasn't mainly West Sacramento. So to have most of the development occurring in the Swainson's Hawk corridor, and then nearly all of the mitigation happening in Cache Creek and in the mountains doesn't really get that job done. So I think as we look at and it adds a huge amount of cost. So I think we need to look at that issue structurally of how the JPA has been organized, and the advisory committee in particular has been organized as a way to create subtle distortions in that lens, as we approach the issue of whether or not we can afford to do an NCCP. And for me, I mean, it's not broken out in here, but I would want to know for sure this whole species of local concern question and the Native Plant Society listed only species, even on the covered species piece, how much cost that actually adds, right? I mean, if it's just we're doing the required species, and it just happens to be that these species of local concern live in the same exact habitat that those species do, so we're getting a twofer for the same dollar. That's one thing. But if that's not the case, if what's really occurring is that we've got this list of species that we must deal with, and that implies this habitat, and then we're adding these species of local concern that add all this additional habitat, and that's what's driving the cost up by $300 million, we can't do that. We can't do that. This cannot be a sort of a habitat plan that our environmentalist friends and our academic friends can play with other people's money. We have to deal with our mitigation problems and challenges as part of that work. So I do think that species of local concern issue, if the JPA determines that it wants to continue along that vein, we need to see some of the numbers around what the real implications of that, and I'm sure the other partners will feel the same way, but what the real implications of that are in terms of the cost of the plan, because I think we need to focus on getting our core job done first, and if that can be done on an ancillary basis, then we ought to, but otherwise no. And the same question, I'm open. I mean, if this whole system doesn't come together, and the issue of keeping it in the county as opposed to not, to me that's a desirable goal, but it doesn't trump the previous ones, right? If the best Swainson's hawk habitat to replace habitat loss is in across the river on Garden Highway, just off Garden Highway, then that shouldn't be seen as so bad that we're going to just not deal with Swainson's hawk at all, and instead we're going to spend the money on the foothill corridor. And so I think those are the kinds of questions that both of the JPAs, now that we have the luxury of being able to talk about the content, needs to, but we also should pay attention to the structure of the JPA's underlying decision making to make sure that this pragmatic focus on getting this done survives, even if Supervisor Saylor and Councilmember Ledesma aren't there, as they haven't been for the last 10 years, that it is still driven by these core principles around being effective and being efficient at achieving what both our legal mandate is, but also our environmental responsibility. Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would agree. I think there is a net benefit to have this type of plan in place for us, and we are going to be developing, and we've heard the horror stories of what if we don't have a plan like this in place, and the permitting issues, and we have enough on our plate and other permitting issues to have this as one of the major hurdles in what we need to do here. And we've got a lot of competing interests in Yolo County. We've got the ag preservation, the Swainson hawk preservation, and a number of other issues. But I would also agree that we kind of have to look at this plan as something that's, I know it's kind of had a little bit of a runaway in terms of what it's supposed to do, and the cost of that, and what really the incremental cost would be to, for example, get into the species of local concern. And really, when you look at the money aspect of this and how you're going to actually provide the mitigation, but I'm good with moving this forward. I think without the leadership of Supervisor Saylor and Councilmember Ledesma, it certainly provided me a lot of confidence that this thing is moving in the right direction now. I know both of them and the executive director also have a good focus on this, so I'm very confident that's going to move forward. So I would be supportive. Yet the concern again would be this can't be an all-expansive plan that covers every single little species that ever existed in this county, but it's got to be realistic, and there's going to be prioritizations. We just don't have the money to be able to do everything, and I'm not really sure if there's a scientific basis to do that anyway, except for some specifically identified species. So.
Yeah, very briefly, because quite frankly, you really covered it all, Mr. Mayor. Did a very, very good job of articulating, I think, what a number of people think. For me, of course, it's issues of costs issues of timing. It just really can't take forever. And at the same time, the costs are going to have to be a very serious issue. I can remember when I first was on the Habitat, I can't remember what year it was now, but it was a few years ago. When it started? No. One of the major issues that came up was the fact that the city of West Sacramento was a major contributor, and yet very little of the habitat plan was, or the habitat mitigations were anywhere near West Sacramento. And the same issue exists today. We really need to look at that issue on how it best provides for the species and really raise the comfort level of the people in West Sacramento. The people in West Sacramento, they're buying the homes, they're doing whatever they're doing, and they want to make sure that whatever money's in some respects they're contributing, they get some kind of credit for. So, I mean, I think that when we talk about Dunnigan Hills and the Cache Creek corridor, and certainly they are important, but at the same time, it needs to be taken under consideration. And I really think the board is the board is really doing a decent job of trying to get that information out, get that feeling out that they are looking at all of these issues. And so it's something that is of some kind of concern to me, but at the same time, I think that Dawn and Chris and Marchant, you have at least brought it back to what the original intent was going to be. And so I think we can have a very, very decent discussion about how to make it succeed today, tomorrow, and into the future, whereas it just sort of languished for whatever reason 10 years ago. So anyway, so I'm supportive of this because I do think that the development community needs that, even though they're paying for it, but I mean, they still need that safety net. They need that assurance that they can move forward with their projects, because by the time you deal with the federal level, and then you deal with the state level, and then you get back to the local level, it can be, time is not on their side, and it could be very, very damaging to a good development, because timing is also something that is important to them. So I'm supportive of this, but one of the things that I will do is keep a close track on, or a closer track on, the costs, and of course how much time this thing is going to take. And then one of the other issues that I will wrestle with a little bit, and that is where the monies are being spent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just real quickly, I'll piggyback a little bit. I'm not going to repeat what's been said because I think it's pretty thoroughly been discussed, but I do want to thank you guys for coming out this evening. I know it's been a tremendous amount of work putting together the plan that we have, or the presentation that's before us this evening being considered. But what a disaster. I mean, honest to God, what a disaster. If you'd have told me 12 years ago when I was asked to participate, to drive to Woodland once a month to be a part of what we thought was a good plan at the time, I would have said, hell no, because what a disaster this is to be here where we are, to say this is how far we've come, or not, and still have so many obstacles before us. I think it's been, staff have done a good job of laying out, I think, the next steps, but what I will say, and I think Councilmember Ledesma's alluded to it, we need a right-sized plan and not try to save the world with this plan. That's not what it was intended to do. But we do need to institute a series of measures that ensures that we don't get sidetracked or we get derailed again, because that is what has happened without having to state it all over again. It just constantly gets derailed in the interest of trying to create that that perfect plan. We've avoided multiple opportunities to have a really good plan. And it's been a joke. I mean, we call it what it is. If you'd have said 15, 20 years ago, here's where we would be, I would have absolutely not subscribed to it for a million reasons, all of which have been identified this evening. But I do think we need to make sure that there are protections in here that everybody can agree to, both the state, the federal, all the interested parties that we've identified repeatedly here that, over the years have threatened litigation or have threatened to derail the plan for one reason or another. And have been successful at it, just kicking the can down the road. But I think what we have here before this evening does make some sense, but it's very disheartening to see how much money has been spent on what amounts to a lot of nothing. We've gotten so close to making those purchases and we've not been able to do it. And as the mayor alluded to, we need to make sure that we don't just walk up to the edge, that we actually take that extra step to make some of the purchases, which is what this plan was intended to do, but has been unable to do. So it's frustrating. I mean, I think everybody's feeling the same level of frustration, but what I think has been presented this evening makes some sense.
We're going to ask Mr. Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma to close, but just two other items. One, I really support the notion of figuring out how this all connects with the Bay Conservation Development Program, and without getting into the problem of, well, let's wait until that's clear, because that's the other trap. Is we say, hey, well, we don't know what that's going to be yet, so let's hold off and no, we shouldn't do that. But we should be very thoughtful, and I know you are, about what the linkages are and what the implications, good and bad, could potentially be. And the other is, I think we've never really had this conversation countywide, and it's mainly the county. It's entirely the county's decision. But looking at the Dunnigan Hills corridor and the county's, at least initial plans, I don't know what this, what the status of them are, but the plopping an entirely new city essentially into that corridor it has consequences for this, both in terms of what the priorities are and what the threats are to habitat. So this really is one of the critical habitat corridors that we're investing in easements and what have you to protect, while the county is simultaneously contemplating potentially plopping a whole new city there. It's a challenge. So I would like to, as we get further into this, get a some understanding of how those relate and what the county's thinking is about how that plays out in terms of if that's. I never thought of that as a critical habitat area, but maybe it's the local species, the species of local concern that's driving that. But I think when this was brought before SACOG as part of the blueprint, the Dunnigan piece was sort of described as a non-habitat. It was not an area where there was sensitive habitat, so it wasn't a question. But here, at least on this particular map, it's shown as a critical habitat corridor. So I'd be interested in learning more about that. So, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma.
Thank you. And before I start, were there any, Charlene, any clarifications, or Petrea, maybe there's things?
I did have just a couple of points to clarify quickly. In the beginning of the first draft, Petrea and Heidi Schuden put together about 4 pages of different things that they have issues that they have already identified with the first draft plan. And it talks about that there's a lot of overlap within the document. There's overlap amongst the habitats. They think there's some efficiencies to be gained. The plan also doesn't look at adjacent habitats and some of the overlap there. So a lot of the points you've raised tonight are very good and are helping us to feed into all the things that we'll need to look at in the next draft. And then to clarify, the species of local concern, the costs that we've outlined, those do not include any implementation of the species of local concern. Basically, at the advisory level, the discussion has been the plan has the opportunity to provide some gap measures for these species, but that implementation of that will likely need to come from other funding. And so it may not actually get implemented if there isn't funding available. So those are some of the things that are mulling around. So the $504.7 million does not include the species of local concern. And that cost is likely to go down, especially if Petrea has her way with the plan. She's definitely identified some efficiencies that need to be brought into the next draft.
Thanks, Charlene. And that's the point I wanted to kind of end on. I appreciate all your input, and I was taking notes, and I've worked with Petrea long enough to know she's taking notes back there. You know, I think that you'll leave it to Councilmember Villegas to state what it is. It's a disaster, but but it's also an opportunity. I mean, let's, you know, and that's the way I've tried to view this the last few weeks. It's been an opportunity for each of you and us. I mean, sure, Supervisor Saylor and I have been forced into it because we happened to drew the short straw and took that board seat. But you know, I think it's an opportunity for all of our peers across the county in yellow, all the electeds, frankly, to have to pay attention to this again. This took place on our watch, and it's been a disaster on our watch across the region. Every elected in Yellow County in the last 10 years has somehow put this to the last on their list of things to worry about. And so it is what it is, and we're moving on. So it's an opportunity now, as you said, to get it right. We have an opportunity now to focus on what matters most. And this current slate of electeds and all of us that are leading our respective cities and counties have an opportunity to kind of put our chips back out there and say, okay, conservation means something in Yellow County and for West Sacramentans. I appreciate Councilmember Kristoff your concerns that are West Sacramentans seeing any conservation, open space conservation in West Sacramento for the dollars that have been spent here. That's very good. Again, that's a great observation. Is that an opportunity for us? It could be, and I'll be sure to wear that and keep that in mind as we move forward on the plan. And I think the other part is the opportunity we have, and with the leadership we have in place through Petrea and Heidi, who have been so darn diligent and competent throughout this entire process. We know, we have identified the areas that we need to go back to the state. This is ours to form. And we need to go work with our partners from the state to make these things happen, to right-size it. And you know, all I can say is we have no other choice at this point. And if it can't happen, then we'll be back here to have another conversation. We don't want to get to that point, but that's our right as member jurisdictions of this JPA. If things don't go our way, it's a negotiation. And we're going to take the tact of a work plan that's going to focus on sort of the big things first and try to knock out some of these really critical issues to see if we can make some progress. And so we can keep on a track of work that gets this done in a reasonable time. And I'm confident in that. I'm confident in our ability to do that. We have the knowledge, as Charlene pointed out, our team has already figured out what those issues are and where we should stand. And I think I'm just going to take a lot of your feedback and try to incorporate that as we move forward. I'll also say, you know, to Councilmember Villegas' point, you know, I really kind of hesitate on beating ourselves up too much when I'm hearing other jurisdictions. Santa Clara just got their permit last year, and they took 10+ years to get theirs done. That doesn't make me feel any better, but too much better. But you know, we're in the amount of money we spent somewhere, and then what does it portray about mid-tier of where the last 10 jurisdictions that got theirs. This is an expensive process, an expensive proposition we're going for. But again, the alternative is having a process, a streamlined process, and I think that's what we're trying to go for. So I appreciate your comments. I'm looking forward to continuing serving on this board, and I'll try to incorporate your thoughts into moving forward. So that's all I have.
All right, so we'll take that as a motion to continue the city's participation in the program through the second administrative draft with the comments and direction and framework that's been described by the council this evening. So is there a second to Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma's motion? Seconded by Mr. Ledesma. Seeing no further discussion on the
motion, then seconded by me.
Seconded by Mr. Villegas. Sorry. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing no, motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
That whole motion process was a disaster, by the way.
The longest motion ever. Okay, item 16, and thank you very much, Petrea and Supervisor Saylor, and Mr. Kennedy, Commissioner Kennedy. Okay, item 16 is presentation and discussion of ordinance 13-3 regarding density bonus and ordinance 13-4 regarding reasonable accommodation. Ms. White?
Good evening, Mayor Cabaldon and members of the City Council. The revised density bonus ordinance and the new reasonable accommodation ordinance are mandated by the state, and both of the ordinances are addressed in the housing element that is undergoing review by the state as we speak. The updated housing element clearly states that the city will update the existing density bonus ordinance to be consistent with state law, and it also says that the city would also adopt a reasonable accommodation ordinance. The city's density bonus ordinance was adopted in 1993, and in 2005, the state made significant and numerous changes to the density bonus law. And upon the advice of the city attorney, the ordinance change is being handled as a repeal and reenactment, given the number of changes that are needed to bring the current ordinance in compliance with state law. The ordinance largely adopts the requirements of the government code rather than repeating all those requirements, which are very specific. The amount of density bonus is still based upon the percentage of affordable units that will be provided for each income level. Under the density bonus law, project density can be increased up to a maximum of 35%. In addition, senior housing projects automatically qualify for a 20% increase in density, and land donations also qualify for a density bonus as well. Moving on to the reasonable accommodation ordinance, the Federal Fair Housing Act and the California Fair Employment and Housing Act require local governments to make reasonable accommodations, which would mean either modifications or exceptions in their zoning laws and other land use regulations and practices when accommodations may be necessary to afford disabled persons an equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. In 2003, the California Attorney General stated that local governments have an affirmative duty under the Fair Housing Law to provide reasonable accommodation for individuals with disabilities. To facilitate equal housing opportunities for disabled persons, the proposed reasonable accommodation ordinance establishes a formal procedure for persons with disabilities to make a request to the city for reasonable accommodation in the application of the city's land use and zoning regulations. The requests can be made by any person with a disability. The application requirements are outlined in the ordinance, but in a nutshell, the request would be made to the Community Development Director, and she would either grant or deny the request based on findings. If the request is made in conjunction with the discretionary permits such as conditional use permit or planned development permit, the request will be made with that application, and the hearing body will make a decision as to whether or not the request will be granted or denied. The findings that must be made for either granting or denying the reasonable request are based on whether or not the individual making the request has a disability protected under the fair housing laws. The accommodation must be necessary to make the housing accessible and suitable for the individual with the disability. The accommodation cannot impose an undue financial or administrative burden on the city. And lastly, the accommodation would not require a fundamental alteration of the city's land use and zoning. And what I interpret that to mean is that the purpose and intent of the zoning district would not be negatively impacted by granting such a request. This concludes staff presentation. A public hearing on both ordinances is scheduled for August 21st, and I'm available to answer any questions that the council may have.
All right, other questions for staff before we take public comment? All right, then we do have one request to speak by Mr. Lowell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell, West Sacramento for the record. And I guess you'd say my present experience seeing the steep steps in front of my house being converted to wheelchair accessibility is sort of highlights this. I've been arguing in favor of this kind of thing for several years now, but this is really going to make a big difference to me. And as I stated before, the universal design of homes, building them so that they are wheelchair accessible for the disabled, is a very small percentage. I understand it's something like maybe 1 or 2% of the cost of a house these days. So I don't think it would exaggerate things to require at least 50% of all new homes and apartment dwellings and so forth to be the future ones of the future be built with that universal design in mind, because more of us are living longer, but in our later years we then require those changes, and so I say we should have more apartments and homes be built with that factored in to begin with. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. All right, that's our only request to speak on the item. Do you have any, Ms. White, any additional information following the public comments? Any clarifications or responses? Okay, then we'll turn to the council. Further discussion? So I was trying to, just first to a process question, a process point, I guess it's not really a question. One is, I really struggle with the repeal and reenact approach, because I have no idea what it used to say. You know, even in the legislature, when you do this, you're required to you strike out the entire old one. It's generally a lazy drafting approach. I get where there are times when it makes sense, but it should be the rare exception and not the rule, so that we can see what language is actually being changed, because that's what we're voting on, is the changes to the law in our city, and I can't see what the old law was. So just as a matter of personal preference with respect to the processing here, I prefer where possible that we get a true red line version as opposed to the repeal and reenactment piece. The other is SB 1818, the bill that does this. I can't find it as a 2005 piece of legislation. I was trying to look up the bill as well.
I'll confirm that is, I thought there was a Senate bill, but I'll confirm that. I might.
It may be that it was a 2004 bill that was effective in
January
of 2005.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sorry, you're exactly right. I'm seeing it. And the reason I wanted to look it up is, I was encouraged to see how old it is, because this basic approach of the density being something that you have to wrestle out of a local government is now in 2013 pretty antiquated. And so it's just when you take all these density bonuses and you add them up, and you could have pretty significant changes to density. That doesn't change, but we're building a road width or a streetcar frequency or a water pipe or whatever. The infrastructure that we're putting in place to serve these projects assumes a particular level of density. And so these bonuses where the actual project comes in after you've already done your sewer master plan, your stormwater master plan, your road master plan, and you've built the infrastructure, and the project comes in and says, hey, I'm going to do this thing, and now I get a 40% density bonus. I'm going to build 40% more units than was in any of your infrastructure master plans, is really bad policy, and it's not necessary in places like ours, which have taken a whole new look at density. Not that density is always good, but there are points where it is and points where it isn't, and we're trying to be very surgical and precise about that. So this one's old, so it's not an issue anymore. But it's one of those items we may want to communicate to our lobbyists to just have that on our tickler list. That as density, if there are future density bonus bills that add more density bonus stuff into the law, that at least it gets flagged for us to take a look at, or for the city manager's office to look at, as to whether it might be something that we might want to weigh in on, because it's just not, I mean, 2005 is a long time ago, but it's an antiquated approach to dealing with that fundamental issue. Having said that, I think the actual proposal, I mean, we need to follow the law as misguided as it is. And so I'm supportive of moving these forward to the first hearing at the first reading at the upcoming meeting. So, any other questions or discussion on this one at this time? And this will be back to us on August 21st. All right, thank you very much. Item 17 is consideration of Resolution 13-62, approving the financing of hardware and software for the police and fire departments, one of which is present.
Thank you. The mobile data computers, or MDCs as they're called, were installed in the police and fire vehicles in 2007 and are in desperate need of replacement. Due to the MDC's age, the cellular coverage problems we're having in West Sacramento with AT&T and general equipment failures, these devices are now causing numerous disruptions for public safety personnel working in the field. With the addition of the in-car camera system a few years ago, various upgrades to critical field software, and with the requirements of the new computer-aided dispatch system going live in September, these systems are now woefully underpowered to even support the basic needs of the department. All the current MDCs are past their warranty life and are experiencing costly equipment failures, coupled with the fact that they've been used at least 2 years longer than their industry standard life cycle of 3 to 4 years. To make matters worse, the MDCs have been experiencing decreased cellular coverage from AT&T just due to technology changes over the last 5 years and the coverage gap that we're having. 6 years ago, the MDC replacement plan was to coincide with the replacement of the patrol cars, which at that time was about 100,000 miles, or roughly under 5 years. When the city began facing some financial challenges, one of the first changes that had been made to actually increase the lifetime of the patrol car. That, coupled with some administrative and technical challenges on incrementally replacing MDCs, prolonged the life of our current MDCs and threw that replacement schedule off track. Over the last 6 years, we've also seen the introduction of new security requirements from DOJ to secure our mobile data environment. These changes include two-factor authentication, which are due to be implemented in 2014 across all agencies, segregating our public safety network and applications away from the city network, and monitoring for security breaches. The proposal laid out in the council report addresses each of these issues. IT has worked with the police and fire departments to analyze their MDC needs and testing and the cellular data providers to determine the best fit for them. The police department chose the Panasonic Toughbook CF53s, and the fire department through testing chose the Panasonic Toughbook CF19s. Both departments preferred Verizon Wireless over AT&T just due to the increased speed, better bandwidth, and better coverage in our area. We'll be implementing a cellular data monitoring system called NetMotion Locality, which will actually help us isolate some of the dead spots in the city to work with the vendor on improving those and to proactively monitor the data connections to kind of ward off problems that we see with cellular coverage. We'll also be installing two-factor authentication that will work with our existing mobile VPN to secure and streamline our mobile system access from the field. And we'll also be upgrading the police and fire networks and the virtual server and storage systems to comply with DOJ's isolation requirements. The Finance Division of Administrative Services weighed different options on how to finance this entire project and ultimately decided that since interest rates are still low, it was the best decision to finance it over 4 years. Staff is recommending that the City Council approve Resolution 1362 and approve the corresponding budget appropriation to fund the MDC replacements. I'll be happy to answer any technical questions you have, and Natish from Finance will be able to answer any financial questions you have related to this project. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Questions for staff? Mr. Villegas?
I guess, well, it's maybe not a question. Well, I guess it is. So would we, obviously, we have determined, or you have, that the urgency of it requires us to finance it. Is this, have we used this method of doing this kind of work in the past, or is this a new way of?
We recently financed some storage area network and some IT infrastructure. That was a few months ago that was brought to the council. And so this isn't the first time we would have been financing IT equipment. The reason we're proposing to do this now is previously we had done an incremental replacement program, like as Rob described, when the patrol cars were we got off cycle. Now the MDCs are outdated, and then with the introduction of the new computer-aided dispatch system, they'll be be further compromised. And so the plan here is to do a wholesale replacement of the MDCs, get them all in the same replacement schedule, and financing them over 4 years at a very low interest rate.
Yeah, I've seen in the staff report, the interest rate is very appealing. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I support what's being proposed. I just wanted to make sure I understood. I mean, as we go down this path of trying to make sure that we're staying on top of our bills and not, as Bill has alluded to, sort of kicking that can down the road and refinancing our stuff.
I think our plan is also, during the 4-year period, is to come up with a sinking fund so that at the end of the 4 years, when they're due for replacement again, we have a plan in place for the next wave of technology for the police department and fire department.
Good, makes sense.
So on that topic, do the new systems, the new Panasonic systems, are they interoperable with each other? I mean, will the police system and the fire system have any capacity to connect either directly or through the centralized systems?
To each other, yes, both systems will communicate. The back-end piece is common. They just have different technology devices in the cars, but they'll communicate on the same networks.
And are these the use of predictive analytics and sort of other technological advances to improve policing in particular, and some of this is happening in fire as well, but very much so in policing. Are these sort of state-of-the-art with respect to their ability to contribute to that work? Or are we getting the very best 2009 model because it's more affordable? How is this relating to the innovations in policing that a lot of departments are doing? And I know that our new chief is interested in it as well for West Sacramento.
The systems we're putting in are state-of-the-art as of today. They have very common components. The technology's there. It really, when it comes to like predictive policing and that kind of stuff, it'd be more the software that would take care of that, and they would definitely be able to run that software. That's also why we're looking for like a 4-year lifetime on these devices versus the 5 or 6 that we did originally when we thought 5 would be a good year, just because the technology changes so fast, it's hard to keep up. So by reducing the time they stay in the car, I don't foresee a problem with being able to handle the technology that comes out over the next 2 to 3 years in that arena.
Okay, and I'm assuming so. But the work within the department on this. I mean, we could, if we waited 6 more months. There's not some new initiative. And I'm looking at you, but the chief's here. But there's not. So we're not anticipating a new initiative in this same domain. Where in 6 months we might say, gee, if we were ordering these, if we just waited to order these for 6 months, once we knew what our predictive policing or other technology or innovation might be in the department, that we would have been better off.
I do not believe the choices we're making today will have any impact on that.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma?
Thank you. And so the new equipment we're getting, the useful life on these is?
The useful life in most of these devices is 3 to 4 years. Industry standard by Gartner and people that do this say 3 years for these kind of devices just because of the environment they operate in. I believe 4 years is a good number, at least through testing. We noticed when we had our current MDCs that it wasn't until 4.5, year 5 that we started experiencing a whole bunch of technical problems with them, equipment failures, screens going out. So I believe 4 years is a solid number as far as their useful life.
Yeah, and so, Carol, kind of back on the point on the way we're financing these, we have a 4-year lease to coincide with a 4-year useful life. The only thing that just kind of caught my eye is the prepayment on these, on the financing. It's just, it's just, I guess what I'm getting at is we don't have the money to pay for it today. We're financing it through the lease program, getting a great rate. So
we're using the equipment fund for the first 2 years of this budget cycle, which would be an appropriate expenditure for appropriate fund for this expenditure, and then we were proposing in the next 2 years to pay for that out of the operating budgets for the police and fire departments, the actual lease payment. And like I said previously, what we're going to be doing is coming up with a plan over the next couple of years that would be like a sinking fund, so that when 4 years elapses from now, we're not going to have to finance again if we don't want to. Yeah. The funds would be available for the replacement of this equipment or whatever technology might be in vogue at that time.
Thank you.
Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, just quickly, is this something you can purchase through the state DGS?
All the prices for the software and for the quick answer to that question is yes. The pricing that we got for the Panasonic devices were based off like state contracts and things that have been go out to get. And then we chose a local vendor out of Sacramento just because they gave us some buyback options for our older equipment. But yeah, the pricing was pretty much all standard based upon state contracts were already in place.
So basically with the buyback provision, it's neutral in terms of...
For the most part, yeah, you'll find the different preferred vendors from Panasonic, and for the pricing off the contract, what you get is the vendor added value or the value added from the reseller. And in this case, we were getting a good buyback option from the person we chose that the other ones weren't offering to us.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any further questions or discussion?
The item.
All right, it's been moved by Mr. Villegas, seconded by Mr. Johannesson. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. All right, council calendar, Ms. Richardson.
Wanted to point out a couple of items. Tomorrow morning at 11:30, there's going to be the groundbreaking for the Capitol Yards project, formerly known as West Capitol Commons. That's going to be taking place. Not on your calendar is the Tomra grand opening, which is going to be on the 13th of August at 9:30, and that's at 850 Riverside Parkway. I believe that was also noted in the council newsletter, and I believe you received an invitation for that too. They are trying to get confirm who's going to be attending. So if you haven't RSVP'd already, if you could let us know, that would be appreciated.
When is that, Carl?
That's August 13th at 9:30.
Thank you.
Your newsletter said it was 9 o'clock, but the invitation is 9:30, so that's 9:30 a.m. Also on August 16th, the League of California Cities, our Sacramento division, is trying to arrange a tour of some of the newly incorporated cities in the area, some of the highlights. That may be, we may be doing that on the 16th. That is still a little bit up in the air, but you may be hearing something about that the next couple days.
Does that include us?
That
would
includes
include
us, yes.
We're almost 27 now.
But it's with Rancho Cordova and
Citrus Heights.
And compared to the city of Sacramento, we're young.
On the 26th, I just wanted to point out that that's the day, the Nippon Chokan festivities. On your DS, there's a breakout of the day's events, minute by minute, in English and in Japanese, so you can have that before you. On the 28th of August, the American Leadership Fellowship, ALF, is going to be hosting a reception for our new police chief, and that's going to be on the Hornblower, and all the council's invited to that. And then finally, on August 27th, the services for Mike Lucan's family members will be taking place at 10 o'clock at the Bayside Covenant Church in Roseville. Just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on the calendar? All right, city manager's report.
Just briefly, Mayor, at our last council meeting, you briefed the council on the meeting we had with the governor's office on the infrastructure finance district legislation. There is a bill that's going to be amended this week to include the provision that currently restricts IFDs in redevelopment areas. If that is signed into law, that'd be an enormous tool for us in post-redevelopment era. It's going to be heard. It'll be amended this week. We'll confirm the language which works for us, and it will be heard in the Senate Appropriations Committee on Monday.
Which bill is
It's
that?
AB 662 by Atkins from San Diego.
All right, any questions on the city manager report? I do want to, if you would please let your team know the National Night Out last night was yet again a big success. We had a lot of 19 at least 19 officially recognized neighborhoods, and others ad hoc groups of neighbors of various sizes, all volunteers coming together to get to know one another, to let each other know that they have each other's back, And they really, really appreciated the city's support and the police department's support in both the organizing of the block parties, but all the fire trucks and the police officers and other parts of other agencies of the city coming by and making those block parties into something special. It was really well done and very, very, very much appreciated by residents in those neighborhoods and residents in other neighborhoods who I've already heard are planning to sign up for next year because they thought it was such a great event. So, all right, city attorney report. All right, and staff direction for members of the council. All right.
I do need to note, I will not be at the next meeting on August 21st as it is scheduled to Carol, the city manager, and the mayor. So,
all right, and for the motion to adjourn, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma.
Wait a minute.
Mr. Mayor, we have future agenda item requests?
Are you adjourning or are you adjourning
Oh,
the
yes.
closed session?
Oh, all right. Yes.
I'm sorry.
We're recessing back into closed session.
Oh, thank you. So,
but when the motion to adjourn is made.
Yes, we like to dedicate and adjourn this meeting in the memory of Neela and Sydney Lucan, the wife and daughter of our colleague and team member Mike Lucan. Just all our thoughts and prayers are with that family at this point.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma. All right, with that then, the council is going to recess back into closed session.